Our next guest is comedian and writer Kate Willett. She joins us to discuss her latest piece on how the pandemic helped spark the slacker uprising and why the long tradition of anti-work is inspiring workers to embrace their right to be lazy. Welcome to Rising, Kate.
Hello, nice to see you.
You too. So this was a really fascinating piece. What inspired you to write it in the first place?
You know, I actually discovered the anti-work subreddit during the pandemic, and it was really fun to read. And I just tweeted about how it was fun to read. So this magazine approached me and was like, would you want to write something on this? And I was really excited about it because I felt like there was just a lot of radicalization happening in that subreddit. And it was just a cool space that was growing really rapidly.
Take us inside the anti-work subreddit. I'm like fascinated if you can tell us and share a little bit of what you learned kind of diving into it. And then also one thing you write about too is how that kind of goes along in this historical wave that a lot of people forget about in terms of like the anti-work space.
Yeah, so the subreddit, I think before the pandemic was like a mid-sized subreddit, but during the pandemic, it's grown to like 2 million at this point. And the idea behind the subreddit is work abolition. And some people take that, completely literally and are, talking about a future where we are all guaranteed what we need to survive. And work is not something that you have to do to be able to get your basic needs met. And some people are in there, kind of talking about things like just better working conditions, unionization, but the most popular types of posts in there tend to be like people quitting really bad jobs, telling off really bad bosses, or occasionally seeing something really awful, like there was this one post, I think probably the most viral post they've ever had, where someone actually passed away, and it was their coworker writing about it because their boss forced them to work during chemotherapy. And I think these kind of terrible things are happening in workplaces all the time, and I think that this space has brought a lot of awareness to it on a pretty mass scale. 2 million is a lot of people.
Is this a purely online phenomenon, people just writing in a subreddit, or is this leading to organizing in the real world?
So, I think that that's one of the valid criticisms of the subreddit is like, okay, this space is online, there's a lot of people posting. Is this leading to, any kind of real life union efforts? And I talked to a union organizer in Wisconsin who's working with the teachers union there. And, she was talking about how this type of awareness is often like the precursor to starting to organize with your coworkers in real life. Just the idea that like you do deserve more from your workplace. And, for maybe someone reads the post on this subreddit and they kind of get over that, what Kristen Leidy, the unionized organizer I talked to, calls weaponized guilt, like this idea that you're just supposed to be happy with your workplace, that there's this like Protestant work ethic, that you're supposed to, just work really hard. And, if anything, like wanting better conditions or money is somehow selfish. And people, I think, are kind of using this as sort of like a self-help tool that gives them sort of like the strength and inspiration to actually go do that organizing in real life.
Yeah, it does remind me a bit of the almost like Bernie Sanders saying Medicare for all. Like you have these cultural shifts
or
and
UBI.
Certain things. Yeah, or UBI, but just the just literally repeating Medicare for all, like in the richest country in the world, we shouldn't have people dying or whatever. Like that changes people's consciousness, and I think does lead to real life organizing. I mean, we see this with what's happening now with Starbucks organizing. I do think that before, there's this old labor saying, like my uncle used to say this, educate, agitate, organize. And this does seem like it's the educating and agitating part, which will lead to the organizing part. Not to sound like a total self-parody stereotype. Yeah.
Yeah.
Too late for that.
I know.
A sociologist I talked to named Wilson Sherwin, she compared it to like the old school feminist consciousness raising groups, where people would sort of, I think the example that she gave is, women sitting in a circle and being like, instead of feeling really isolated with like the experience of having an abusive husband, perhaps it was like, oh, actually a lot of people are having this experience. This is something in our culture that we need to change.
Yeah, this is so interesting because like I'm obviously on the other side of this question, and I think it's probably both impractical and from my perspective, I would say probably immoral too, because I believe in the old conservative talking point about the dignity of work. But I really do believe that. I believe there's something very dignified and empowering about work. That said, how do people on the subreddit or even in the movement more broadly deal with questions like that? And I'll talk about the practicality one in and of itself, because this is so the Marxist quote you include in your story. Marx has that passage about how a man can be a fisher in the morning, a poster in the afternoon, and a gamer in the evening, which is so interesting because
well, Marx didn't say gamer. That's a paraphrase from a podcast.
Yes,
Jamie Peck modernized
Jamie
that.
Peck. Yeah, that's the. If Marx had said that,
right.
Marx prescient in many ways, not that prescient.
Not that prescient. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But he adapted obviously the famous quote from Marx, and that would have been funny if nobody corrected me.
That would be based, as the kids say. I think.
Yeah. In some ways, Marx very based. But I am kind of wondering how in this, we're however many years after Marx was writing, and in this more high-tech space. And there is a different way that we're kind of organized in terms of the economy, in terms of our jobs, our professional and personal lives. Practically, how does the anti-work movement of today deal with the ways we would need to organize our economy in terms of like getting medicine, having doctors, having food, having supplies like basic survival supplies, or functional governments where people have to work? What sort of ideas are they working with on that front?
So, I think that when it comes to anti-work ideas, the main thing is, sort of pulling work apart from survival. Right. So, for example, we would have a society where everyone is guaranteed medical care, as you mentioned, housing. And these things are decoupled from going to work. But that doesn't mean that people wouldn't be doing things like being a doctor, like there would still be doctors, there would like the essential functions of society, people would still be doing them, but it wouldn't be because they would die and starve without doing those things. So, really it's like a way of kind of giving workers actually more dignity, because let's say you have a boss that is sexually harassing you, for example. Okay, there are many people in the United States in that situation that they can't leave that job, for example, because that job is where their health insurance is coming from. But, in a society where we had something like the national welfare rights movement that Wilson Sherwin was writing about in the 1960s, Johnny Tillman, one of their leaders, was really pushing for guaranteed adequate income. So that would mean, everybody would have this kind of baseline of being able to survive, but that doesn't mean that people wouldn't actually have occupations. It's just not something that people would need to do in order to actually eat.
Right, like it frees you to pursue other avenues that are convenient for your schedule and your lifestyle. Yeah.
Right. And maybe then you can work and get. Sorry, Kate, keep going.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just like something like being a doctor, people would be doing that because they actually care about taking care of other people, and it's rewarding, Right. David Graeber, the late great David Graeber, who is an anarchist thinker, talked a lot about bullshit jobs, and this idea that a lot of the work that people are doing is actually not necessary. It doesn't have a function that we need, lots of pencil pushing. And I think he said up to 40% of people when he surveyed have jobs that are not necessary. So I think the idea is let's say we ever got this utopia, we divide the things that are actually necessary and maybe, automate the stuff that's not necessary, or get rid of these bullshit jobs. So people are working, but they're working a lot less and doing things that are important.
And I actually think it gives dignity, this kind of anti-work thinking, ironically, because it's saying that you have a dignity that's decoupled from whether or not you're employed. And that means that you can demand that your bosses respect you. And that means that you get to have dignity while working.
I mean, our corporate structure is very undignified right now. Our work structure there's no question about it. It's very, very undignified.
Yeah. Well, this is a great piece. I recommend people read it. And thank you so much, Kate, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
This was Katie's idea. It was such a good idea. I love this conversation.
There you go.
And we're so happy to have you on, Kate. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Take care.
Likewise. We'll be back with more Rising right after this.